history, we are trying to define the American entity as a whole. Without which America will always be an incomplete thing. Maybe politics, maybe social reforms, maybe civil rights, music, cultural, or ethnic mutual assimilation due to its colonial settlement. The Protestant used during the American Revolution, Civil War, the Reconstruction times in the post of America. One could draw a linear legacy of analysis progression in lens of blacks for various reasons. One, for the sake of argument, questions as to why we need to have black element or black perspective of American movement. This line of argument, shall we say, the lens that we're looking to cannot be something that is detrimental to American promise, but something that is integral, complementary, and consummate to to hold the umbrella term of American brain or American promise. What we'll be talking about will be about American culture, racism, slavery, civil rights, or social equality. But the primary thing of black is not related to black or American history, but an essential commodity that has its own historical denomination. The descendants of enslaved Africans that have brought from the dark continent later became British American as American soil nurtured them all along with the others. Now, the whole story started with the approaching and how and why what are the problems and that the appropriate natives were trying to face in the no man's land. So, when the natives appropriate this question in American soil, then with them came the cultural background, especially the music forms that were introduced in America as kind of like the white man's burdens to civilize the world. It was this black immigration to white man's land that saw the evolution of music forms like boogie, disco, jazz, funk, hip hop, rock and roll, disco, and recent R&B techno music. And if you come to the assimilation part, I mean, it started especially the rappers, jazz especially. And I was thinking of because jazz is very much deep-rooted element in the Western society. But say, for example, Louis Armstrong is the first thing that comes to your mind when you talk about American jazz. But he's not considered to be a mainstream musician because jazz has always been a black form of music, which was again to be specific confined to bars and pubs, etc. So this confinement has literally, it took this confinement and the segregation and giving certain kind of music or playing certain kinds of music only in certain places has always been delaying the process of the marginal music getting assimilated to mainstream society. So the first thing I would say that many forms like hip hop, jazz, Contemporary Parliament, even the latest, the present, even Justin Bieber's the DRE and the Snoop Dogg or the iconic these funk musicians that have been still meddling with the Native American speakers and talking to the latest Eminem. Eminem is also again this rap music that has been very much popular and it started with the blacks, but later on it got assimilated and the whites have completely taken it and it's no longer black music or a black form of singing. So this is what has happened in music. And there are many singers starting from Franklin or Morrison, Prince, Public Enemy. And 1965 was the remarkable moment in history of black people getting the voice and getting popularity in the Western society was the establishment of Motown, a private recording company by the black people and Marvin Gaye. And these days, say for example, how many of you might have heard Bob Marley? So Bob Marley and Che Guevara, I would draw a parallel because they are popular because of the hairstyles. So Bob Marley with his braided hair, so this representation of having a gypsy kind of music and that was who was the movement, etc. So these kind of assimilations have always been there, and the blacks took, I would say that the black writers and singers took song to voice their language because maybe Harlem Renaissance or the Mississippi violence and the two major incidents that really have melted the world were the Baldwin incident and the Birmingham blast. Okay, what happened in '85 and the Birmingham incident happened in 2015 where black singers were targeted and again although the victims were blacks and again took the form of boys and started making it out. And maybe Bob Marley or Prince or any other, because Bob Dylan, my most favorite and the most iconic, is like the legendary American music. Even he also has stated that the even the latest incidents that killed what's the American Floyd, I guess. Yeah, Floyd. So yeah, George Floyd. So in this and the sad part of the story is that the American government has so far given open statement of telling that it was the government's fault which betrayed the promises of the American dream, the American promise that the welfare that the society plans. So and I actually had a lot of songs to be play. I wanted to play and but yeah, and one thing women also play a very crucial role, and Nina Simone is the first singer I would say, and who really she was the first one, and it talked about the poverty, the songs that she has chosen, and 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 maybe she tries all the songs, major of the songs, consoles, and gives hopes for the blacks to fight and the whites really took a lot of time in really grabbing the pain or the agony that black people are going. And so yeah, I'll just quickly pass on to some of the take the names of the singers, and I would say Ruth Brown was iconic one, George Clinton, Smokey Robinson is both a famous writer and a singer, and he has given many breaks to many black singers that really hold and you are really got a hold on me. Tracks of my tears sung by Marvin Gaye and the tears of the clown are sung are songs that really have portrayed the pains of the blacks. And Marian Anderson singing its sensation decades before civil rights movement reached its apex. Marian Anderson performance on steps of Lincoln Memorial in front of an integrated audience of more than 75,000 people stands up in there with one of the greatest moments in the fight of equality. Reflecting, portraying the pains of the black people around the world. And Louis Jordan had a profound impact on several African American musicians that evolved during the first of the 20th century. He simplified swing music. He helped make jump blues, jazz, and boogie mainstream forces. Jordan's legendary work would serve as a precursor to modern blues, rock and roll, and R&B music. Public Enemy was another iconic brand that really helped. Despite its underlying message, Public Enemy could still come with a chance to prove that it didn't have scientific ideas to go with. Another famous singer, Sam Cooke, was basically a writer, but he also helped many singers like A.I.B., Franklin, my favorite Usher, John Lennon. These singers used success of Sam Cooke to fight for equality and ability of American writing artists to perform in front of integrated audiences. Like, I repeat, performing before the integrated audience and getting their applause is one such successful factor that the story has to control the recording industry. 1960s Motown, as I told you, the first black recording company has what's going on. The song, the album released by Marvin Gaye, dedicates the entire album to social issues, especially the struggles of the blacks. Another singer, Fats Domino, brought black music to white teenagers. So Fats Domino is the first form model that really the white teenagers have also embraced her music and became a fan among them as well. Marian Anderson, Public Enemy, Jay Jazz, Story of Oz. I just want to read these four lines of the song, Story of OJ. Skin black, my skin is black, my skin is yellow. Light nigger, dark nigger, half nigger, gay nigger, rich nigger, poor nigger, house nigger, free nigger, still nigger. So whatever it is, after all, it is a nigger. So one form of expression that it makes. Whatever it does, it still makes us. All the forms have these forms have been means of expression. So, again, Tupac Shakur came, Janol Monet that really has and the Birmingham tragedy. Alabama is a song written composed by John Hopkins in the response to 1963. The church was bombed in 1963 in Birmingham, wherein four black choir singers, especially girls, were killed, and Alabama became an iconic song that really represented this certain atrocities that Baptist Church, Birmingham Church, and four blacks were killed. The mournful and elegiac song, The Birmingham Tragedy, written by John Fordwin, remains a testament to the violence black people encounter to this day. And another song by John Baez. John Baez still she's almost 50 years old and she's still singing. And John Baez in Birmingham really counts the deaths of this poor girl child. And my favorite is Nina Simone, Mississippi Goddam. That was her first hit, and I just want to read the lines of the song. I got life, I got. The song tells what the blacks want and what they don't. It's very striking way which tries to console the black to love themselves and embrace what they have. The song starts with not having things like shoes, class, food, and other things. And the second part of the song, tells us what she has. She has a smile, she has her lips, she has a face, she has a life. So this sounds like think, Nina Simone's I Thank God is one such instance where the singers have been repeatedly motivating to the black people to whatever it is, embrace yourself, love yourself, as being such kind of these songs have been bombs. These songs have been proving as bombs for the black people. And as I told you, Snoop Dogg is still in vogue. Even Snoop Dogg has still made songs here with Berger. My favorite was Eminem. He's also a rap singer. Dr. Diari has to diagnose the Flash. And there is another category of music, the impression slave. Curtis Mayfield, Marlon Ryan, Steve Wonder, Jimmy Hamilton, Sly Stone, Ray Charles. Ray Charles is one of the most popular singer, and his songs have been making out the same story again. Okay? And Wilson Pickett, Curtis Mayfield, and George Clinton. So these are some iconic singers that have won accolades across the fields. And here the female singers like Nina Simone and Ruth Brown, Aretha Franklin, and Tina Turner took the 80s by her storm. Tina Turner became an iconic figure in the 1880s, not because also because of her personal struggles in the industry, and also because of the determination with which she fought, and with her husband again, because her husband was the main problem to her, and then really came up and stood. And although she's 40, she's still singing, and still the greatest singers, the black singers, in America sing. So, as I told you, Bob Dylan. And Bob Dylan's most beloved songs from 60s to 70s address issues of police brutality and racism in his albums. So, Hurricanes and George Jackson are two albums by Bob Dylan that really depicts songs, especially to the white, the black songs.
Impression the performance for me for this first presentation. So we are late to the musical aspects. It was a very paper, but I have a you on a topic. Isn't it contradictory when you say I think I exist and the voice is the content?
So I
You want to voice?
want to speak. I want to speak in this content. It's like a kind of satisfaction that I'm not happy. So maybe I'm trying to voice out my content and truly sound.
One question will take from all. No question? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
I now request the second participant, Dr. Parivana Kulkarni, Associate Professor from Department of English of Osmania University, and Dr. Parimala's specialization is women's writing, and as the director already introduced, one of the senior researchers from the Department of English, and the title of her paper is Interrogating the Ugliness of Beauty, Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. Welcome, ma'am.
Hello everyone, thank you for giving me this opportunity. And as my fellow colleague earlier mentioned, it's a burden when somebody says this is going to be an interesting session. So I hope we live up to the expectations. Yeah, and Madam Chair has already mentioned that we have about 10 minutes time. I share your answer, Dr. Kopeshwar. So when you said you came prepared to play songs, but in my case, with wisdom, conference wisdom, experience comes wisdom, that you should never have more than 10 minutes. That's why I don't have a very structured paper. I just have a few thoughts to share with you all. And in that context, I'll just share some of these views. So let me begin by where I'm located. Let me tell you that in the ocean of African literature, actually American literature and African American literature, I'm completely a fish out of water because I've never done anything in American literature. I've never studied also as part of my MA program, which we all do. Then you may be asking, what am I doing here? But my interest in Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye began when I started teaching it as part of a text we teach in women's writing paper. And gender is something that I'm interested in. I'm also interested in knowing the intersectionality of the other factors with respect to gender. So in that sense, I thought let me explore if I can see what um, I would think about the bluest eye. And when I sent the abstract too, I had in mind not exactly looking at the text because Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye is a classic American text. It has been researched quite a lot. So there are several works of analysis and criticism which have gone into that. So that's not really my focus of interest as such. But what I thought is, since this is a novel we all know published in 1970, so this is set in 1940s. So the novel is published in 1970 and the novel is set in the 1940s of Ohio. So basically, I was looking at this context where Toni Morrison tells us the story of Pecola Breedlove, an African American girl. We all know that Pecola is an 11-year-old girl who equates beauty and social acceptance with whiteness. So she therefore desires the bluest eye. So my interest was in looking at how this concept of white beauty or the white beauty norms have they undergone any change from the times that Toni Morrison wrote The Bluest Eye to contemporary times. That was one interest. The other thing that I wanted to look at was I wanted to bring it to contemporary in any other African American writers or African writers, how have they looked at that? So that also had a reason because we teach one more text, which is an African writer, Adichie. All of us are familiar with Chimamanda Adichie's Americana. So this is an African writer talking about the white norms of beauty. Now, I also was interested how we are looking at the beauty norms in our own context, in our own Indian context. How does that work? So basically, these were the premises with which I just want to share a few ideas here. So we know that the bluest eye is divided into four sections where each section is named after a season. And then we all are familiar with the Dick and Jane Reader, which is the story of an white American family. And we know how there are three versions in the text. I mean, those are the text. It's very interesting to just read it, and you can see it how the three versions differ completely. So I won't go into that. So the three versions appear at the beginning of the novel. The first version is clear and very grammatically correct. So it tells the story about mother, father, Dick and Jane, which is a white family. So the focus is on Jane, who seeks a playmate. The second version again repeats the message of the same, but without proper punctuation or capitalization. And the third version lacks punctuation, capitalization, and spaces between words. These three versions, as all of us know, symbolize the three different lifestyles, okay, explored in the novel. So the first is that of the families like the Fishers, which is a white family. The second is that of the well-adjusted, mature children, Claudia and Frida, who live in a house and who are kind of well-adjusted to the things around them. And the third version is the distorted version. This is the version of the breed last to which Piccola breed belongs. So basically, this story illustrates a white middle class family and it was used a lot to teach children in the 1940s. That is the context in which we have to read the story also. I'm not going to Piccola's story because that will take a lot of time. So we all know that Piccola, because she has this strong desire for blue eyes, and the norm, the standard, let me say, Euro-American standards of white beauty that she has internalized makes her desire for the blue eyes. And that desire leads to her a very tragic condition at the end of the novel we all know about that. So, of course, this text has been looked at for from gender point of view, from race point of view. Basically, that has been the focus. That this is talking about the race. So, I won't go into many details about this. Morrison, in an interview, has talked about how she wanted to write this book because she wanted to read such a kind of book because such kind of books were not written. So she says that I wrote this because I wanted to read this kind of book. Also, she expresses another thing in her interview. She says that at that time in the 1960s, she says most of what was being published by black men was powerful, aggressive, revolutionary fiction or non-fiction. So she says these publications have a very positive, racially uplifting rhetoric, what you're also talking about. So the black male authors express sentiments like black is beautiful, used phrases like black queen. So Morrison says, I was worried, that people would forget, quote uh, open words, black wasn't always beautiful, right? She was very concerned that people would be forgetting that black wasn't always beautiful. And she says that in the Bluet style, she set out to remind her readers how hurtful a certain kind of internecine racism is. So that's the reason why she starts. And we all know how people, in trying to get the blue eyes, gets deceived, cheated, trapped by a person we all know as soaphead, church, soaphead church. Yeah. And so at the end of the novel, she has a strong desire for the blue eyes, and we know her tragic, experiences where she's raped by her own father. And by the way, this novel we all know was banned for all these reasons. That it discusses racism, it discusses child molestation, it discusses incest. And I think I was looking up the data till 2019 also it was among one of the books banned in America because of all these reasons as such. And we all know that this was rejected also in the beginning to be published by US. Later, she found a publisher. It was not a commercial success. Okay? So after that, there have been right from the beginning, this novel has seen numerous attempts to be banned actually, and people have looked at it. So that is the Morrison's text as such. Now, as I said, what I'm concerned is, okay, let me just very briefly talk about Avicii's Americana. Now, you may wonder why am I comparing an African writer and African American writer because these are completely different contexts, right? So, as I think Dr. Christopher was pointing out earlier in the session. So here, in Americana, without going into other details, my interest in Adici's Americana is there is a metaphor, hair. She talks a lot about the politics of hair. So, where a Nigerian migrant, when she comes to the US, she is actually forced to kind of unperm her hair because kinky hair, quote unquote, is seen as something unprofessional. That reminds me, by the way, just do a Google search, look for beautiful women. The number of images that you would get on Google is all white women. And then try to Google professional women or professional hairstyle. It is all straight, white, blonde kind of hair. You never, even if you have curly hair, it's loose curls. It's very kind of wavy kind of curls and not really those African kind of curly that we call it. So Americana also, Adici's character experiences this kind of racism which she is unaware of. Whereas in Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, she is, an African American. Whereas what Adici's character comes from Nigeria, who has a very high opinion about US and she has a great opinion about the US. But when she comes here, she has serious identity problems and experiences of racism in different ways. But my interest is in the politics. So I was wondering, like, okay, from a novel which is set in 1940s, published in 1970s, and Adichie published in the last decade, what has happened to the beauty and the way we look at beauty? And also, as I said, I was coming home to look at how do we look at beauty today. Meanwhile, what all has happened is from 1990s onwards, we know the liberalization and the globalization. So today's beauty industry is a global beauty industry. And I was just looking at some of the books. I don't have so much time to go into details everywhere. But basically, if you look at the global beauty standards, so even today, beauty standards are tools of oppression that reinforce sexism, racism, colorism, classism, ableism. I can go on, so many isms, right? Ageism and sizeism. We are worried about size, we are worried about complexion, we are worried about class. In Indian context, caste is a serious factor which affects the beauty standards, right? So these are built into our societies. So I was looking at the books, then I realized there's a lot of work which has been done on examining the concept of beauty. Of course, the concept of beauty we all know cannot be universal. It is culture dependent, it is context specific, it has changed. So, theorists who have worked on the concept of beauty have talked about how beauty was viewed in Greco-Roman times to Egyptian times. And if we look at India, we go back, right? And why I was researching this is another stereotype, which I have come across, where it says that in India, it's only the colonialism which has brought in this obsession with white skin. But we all know that if you go back to Indian beauty norms, people have talked about the Uptan, right? So they apply this thing to make your skin fairer. So the fair skin obsession is also, as I said, there is intersectionality, there is caste to it, there is so many. But my focus in contemporary times is these multi-billion dollar global beauty industries, which are contributing to the privileging of the Eurocentric norms of beauty, whether in terms of skin or the body shape and things like that. So I was actually interested in looking at all these things and um, see whether things have changed, how they have changed, why they have changed, and what are the factors that are responsible. So I was also interested, for example, there are several women who have been very active in propagating these beauty myths. They have been, I came across, there are two Jewish women, American women, who are marketers of these beauty. So I came across this. It's time to search for it. I'll highlight it. But she says, to sell creams, you sell dreams. Okay. So in order to sell creams, you sell dreams. So basically, when women or nowadays in contemporary society, men too, we buy many beauty products what actually they are selling is, I think the CEO of Revlon, he has said, actually what we are selling is hope. It's not as if we are selling only creams. We are selling hope. This is what is also needs to be taken into account. And the latest book I came across is by Martha Lehan, published in 2020. This book is called Mega: How the Beauty Industry Manipulates Consumers, Preys on Women's Insecurities, Promotes Unattainable Beauty Standards. So this book goes on, it has done a lot of extensive research. There are several books. I'm mentioning only a few. This one. So basically, in this book, she has pointed out how the beauty industry generates billions of dollars annually. Okay, more than the gross domestic product of many nations. That's the amount that is generated by these industries. So in this book, she explores the origins of this industry and the factors which are responsible for its continued growth. So here she has focused on the unrealistic beauty standards that are imposed on uh, human psyche. And of course, this also commodifies women nowadays. It's not even just the women, with earlier it used to be fair and lovely. I had presented a paper in this very, at OUCIP on how fair and lovely is neither fair nor lovely. It's not only about ladies with Shah Rukh Khan dancing around fair and handsome, right? So this obsession with fairness and whiteness has come in. So I'll just leave with the last thought. As I was reading the Toni Morrison's USI, I was just thinking, it was in 1940s that Piccola desires the bluest eye. So I was wondering if Piccola were now and here, would she have suffered quote unquote project experience in the same way? Because today we have so many cosmetic surgeries available. It's really possible to change your blue eyes. And I was also thinking of Soaphead Church, whether this character can be seen as a substitute for the multi-billion global cosmetic industry, and these industry giants basically, how they play on the psyche as such. So just like Virginia Woolf thinks of, if there were a Judith Shakespeare, I would like to leave with the thought that if Piccola Breedlove were here and now in 2021, I wonder how her experience would be. Not as if things have been solved, but whether it needs for us to explore whether things have worsened or things have improved in any way as such. As I said, I just gave a very quick overview of what I had. This is going to be not a paper, but several papers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Karimula, for the very interesting interrogation on the ugliness of beauty. Very paradoxical title, ugliness of beauty. I asked the participants, offline participants, if possible, one person will take up.
Often we can take. I think a lot of chapters for men also need to update.
Sorry?
A lot of chapters for men also.
Yeah.
Updating the dress, the gowns.
It's equally oppressive.
Yeah.
So when I say gender, it's both for all the three genders.
Yeah. Chapters for men also.
They are very oppressive because you are not these are such unrealistic standards. I mean, I see the boys, want to go to gym and whether they have it or not. And one more thing when I was reading, I read somewhere that people thought pandemic, many people would not spend so much money on the beauty products. But I believe the beauty industry profit went up during the pandemic. Maybe because people had a lot of time, and they may have invested in this. And we are also aware of the newspaper matrimonial classifieds, right? Wanted the fair, tall, thin kind of thing. This is something all of us are aware of. So my interest also was looking at not just there, but in the Indian context. Yes, I do agree, Azim, that it is oppressive equally for all genders. It is. Yes, it is. It is about power relations. That's why I said it's an intersectionality of several features. Power underlies most of them, right? It's also about domination and the control. Who controls it? It is. But one should be very wary of looking at this. Definitely, I agree with you. Yeah, definitely. What I'm saying is the majority. There is resistance to it. In fact, in Toni Morrison also you have Claudia Gridla. Where she breaks the doll, which is white, Shirley Temple, doll, whereas Pecola kind of hugs it and she wants to drink from a mug which has a picture of a white girl. She thinks drinking milk from that will make her beautiful. Whereas Claudia Gridla pities Pecola, says that I'm this, what I am, and she's very happy with her color, with her hair, and she hates these white dolls actually. She kind of breaks them. Yes, so even there and even now, definitely there. We take time in after the session because we are not very sorry for the interruption. Thank you very much, Dr. Morrison. Yeah, before I invite the third speaker for the presentation, I welcome Dr. Donna Akiba Sullivan Harper, Professor of English, Fuller Callaway Spelman College, Atlanta, Georgia, United States, who has just joined us. Madam is going to give us a keynote address at 4:30, and we are with the presentations now, ma'am. We welcome you, but we are not wasting our time. Sharply, we'll give you 4:30 your allotted time for your keynote address. Welcome, ma'am. We are into the paper reading sessions now. We have two other papers which we are going to complete before your keynote address. Thank you. I now invite Dr. K.W. Christopher, Associate Professor, Department of English, Osmania University, to read the paper. And the title of the paper is Reading Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin in the Dalit Context. Dr. Christopher is an Associate Professor in the Department of English, my elder brother, and an intellectual person who is always passionate for teaching. And I'm happy that you are speaking to the audience who would really take the issues seriously, sir, with a lot of research commitment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Vidya, for those kind words. My paper is longish, but as people have told the way, I'll try to, skip down. I have some, these are some rambling thoughts that as a teacher of literature I have. My focus here is to read an a text which deals with an African American condition from a Dalit context. So, what it means to read Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin from a Dalit experience. I believe parts of it, Dalits, as we all know, and would have been victims of American social structures, and ironically, in contemporary times, are victims of Savarna. These are the terms that Termila Rege uses, or Charan Kumar Timbale uses, or Gopal uses, govern regimes of interpretation. In their new postal avatars, such as post-colonialism, subordinate studies, post-truth, and more recently, critical health humanity. So this is my main focus, that these regimes of interpretation are actually, victimizing or to use colonizing the critical consciousness of Dalit researchers and students and teachers. Consequently, students and researchers use these hegemonic interpretive strategies in understanding, analyzing. Again, this is a very important sentence which I think is analyzing Anglo-American and European literary and cultural productions, often seeing them as Eurocentric, racist, colonial, and also irrelevant to Dalit experience. They say that Shakespeare is somebody you don't need to worry about. Beethoven is somebody you don't need to worry about. So this is a kind of a ghettoization that is resulting from these interpretations. So, I attempt to interrupt such an exception to the reading of this novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. It is the most talked about novel and in the Indian context, the least read novel. Okay, people talk about Uncle Tom as a caricature and a stereotype, but they rarely bother to read the text. And well, this text has been subjected to all kinds of, interpretive strategies, critical protocols in multiple ways by African American writers, from Frederick Douglass through Du Bois, Baldwin, and recently Henry Louis Gates Jr. Now, drawing upon the history of solidarity with African Americans, that goes back to Boole and Ambedkar, and Dalit writers' engagement with African American literature. This paper explores the complexity and relevance of the novel in the context of, my interest is pedagogical. How do we understand text like this? Why is it important? Because it raises important questions about representation, agency, and solidarity. So this novel is important because it is about representation, who represents who, and why and how. The same questions that Dalit critics also have been raising. So it's about representation, agency, and solidarity. Solidarity of the oppressed with fellow oppressed across continents. My question is, can we turn to any text by non-Dalits that has parallels with Uncle Tom's Cabin? Is there any text that comes close to the vision of Uncle Tom's Cabin and which argues for annihilation of caste? Is there any text that argues for annihilation of caste the same way that Stowe argued for the abolition of slavery? This is my question. Can Unnava's Malapalli or Shivarama Karanta's Thomas Run, or a work by Premchand or Munkraj Anand be seen as coming close to the concerns of Harriet Beecher Stowe? And the novel also is, the reading of the novel is also very significant because of the internationalization of caste and multicultural complexity in caste oppression and discrimination. Caste is now being acknowledged as a feature of diaspora. The discrimination against Dalits in UK and USA. You all are familiar with the UK equality law and the controversy in California regarding the school textbooks, which talked about caste. Now, in the diasporic multicultural context, a critique of caste is seen as an instance of Hinduphobia. The same way, criticizing Israel's policy towards Palestine is termed anti-Semitism. So it is important to engage with traditional representations of oppression in the Black and Dalit context. And in recent years, scholars, more so scholars in the Anglo-American world and also African-American scholars have begun to pay closer attention to parallels between race and caste. Now, Dalit's engagement with the Black condition and slavery springs from a sense of solidarity and moral outrage. Mahatma Jyotiba Phule, we all know, dedicated his Ghulamgiri or slavery to Americans for their efforts in abolishing slavery. On reading Uncle Tom's Cabin, Phule remarked, "Anyone who reads this book will have to cry with shame in public and will have to sigh and sob." In contrast, the Savarna post-colonial engagement with African and African American condition is fueled by an anxiety to deflect the critique away from caste and its oppressive character to the deprivations of colonial rule. Race and the history of slavery are invoked to underplay or deny the perpetuation of caste oppression in contemporary times. Caste in the new anti-enlightenment post-truth avatars is not seen as rigid/oppressive, but is seen as a colonial construct. Nicholas Dirks, Devyani Ganguly, and many others argue in the same way. Many Dalit scholars too echo this mode or logic. What is ignored is the fact that anti-caste reformers drew their inspiration from the now denigrated traditions of enlightenment and modernity in forging their liberation discourse. I will leave out this, how the reality of caste is ignored. Dr. A.K. Biswas, the former Vice Chancellor, and the civil servant, wrote an open letter to Dr. Shashi Tharoor about the point that the Vice Chancellor was making in the morning, that who will pay reparations to those communities in India? Well, because if Europeans have to pay, okay, the Africans or the other races for their exploitation. So this is something that, yeah, I just. Now, I'm sorry, I didn't come to the novel. Now, the questions that I wanted to ask was this: that what does Stowe do? Is it mere patronizing? Is she really looking down? It is seen as a patronizing text, or it is used to draw attention to racial discrimination of the West and consequently underplaying the reality of caste oppression. This has been my point. And even the Dalit critics also do the same thing. Janardhan Bagmare and later Sharan Kumar Limbali, they wrote about the connection between Black and Dalit literature. Bagmare reads Uncle Tom's Cabin as a patronizing and condescending text about Black lives, misleading its powerful indictment of white society. So he is indicting the white society and white Christianity. Bagmare also draws untenable parallels between the Negro spirituals, which Du Bois calls songs of sorrows, and Chocomela's Abhans. This is what he does. And I'll jump. There have been many scholars who recuperated this text from the charges of being very, patronizing and all. And one important scholar is uh, Henry Louis Gates Jr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. has come up with an annotated, edition of Stowe and a wonderful introduction. He recuperates this novel for the blacks who have not read the novel, to induce them, to encourage them. So, to conclude, unlike the many non-Dalit literary representations, Stowe does not only portray the sufferings of the blacks, but offers a powerful critique of an unjust society and its institutions, and engages with the political, spiritual, and moral dimensions of slavery. So this is the point that I was trying to argue, that how do we understand a text from our own condition? How do we forge a solidarity with people who have been oppressed? And how do we read the text about them? Thank you.
All of these people also what we see of institutional suppression. We will take only one observation from the offline group and we will move to the next paper. No questions and no observations.
I hardly principle, but I hope that I made my point clear.
Shall we take director, sir?
Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, good evening, sir. Good evening, go, sir.
Good evening, dear. How are you?
Yeah, you can go ahead. Camera on, sir. Sir, yes, sir. Ma'am is here.
Yeah. Right.
Yes, sir.
Very good evening to all of you. Ma'am, very good morning. Here in India, it is time 4:30 p.m.
Good morning, Donna. This is Nabir Ghosh
Ma'am, this
from
is
Agra.
Nageshwar Rao, Director, OUCIP. On behalf of the Osmania University Center for International Programs, Osmania University, Hyderabad, Telangana State, India, we welcome you, ma'am. We have proposed the international conference on major themes and concerns in African American writings, a reassessment, as part of the OUCIP programs and the guidance given by our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor D. Ravindra sir, and the former Director, Professor A. Karunakar sir, and all other distinguished personalities. They suggested the title for the conference. After getting the valuable feedback and suggestions from the learning personality, we have taken this title, ma'am, and we are very thankful to Professor Shruti Das, ma'am, because of her only we are able to listen to you this evening. Ma'am, today morning we have started the inaugural at 10 o'clock. That was done by 11:30 a.m. 11:30 to 1 o'clock we have plenary 1, and 2 to 3:30 we have another plenary talk, and done by paper presentations by the teachers of various departments, especially Department of English, Osmania University. And this evening we are waiting for you to listen to you as part of the conference. I am very happy to introduce today's keynote speaker, Professor Donna Akiba Sullivan Harper, Professor of English, Fuller E. Calvey, Spelman College, Atlanta, United States. Thank you very much, ma'am, for accepting our invitation to deliver keynote on the proposed topic. Before inviting you, let me introduce the chair, Professor N.K. Ghosh, sir. Professor N.K. Ghosh, UGC Emeritus Professor, Agra College, Agra, Senior Fulbright Fellow in the year 2003 for University of Washington, USA. Professor Nikhil K. Ghosh is one of the senior and serious academicians in the country. Professor Nikhil Ghosh is a UGC Emeritus Professor and a former Head Department of English Studies and Research, Agra College, Agra, India. Dr. Ghosh was awarded the prestigious Senior Fulbright Fellow at the University of Washington, USA during 2003 and 4. He is the author of 15 widely acclaimed books that have been acquired by the British Museum Library and the US Library of Congress, and he is an eminent scholar and a critic of American, British post-colonial literatures, and he has published over 180 articles and scholarly essays on various political, social, cultural, and feminist issues in prestigious national and international journals. His books, Calculus of Power, Modern American Political Novels, is listed in the 100 best books in the world in political, social, cultural criticism on imaginative literature 2007. That includes names like F.R. Lewis, Edmund Wilson, James Baldwin, among others. His most recent work is Mirror from the Indus, Essays, Tributes, and Memoirs 2020. He is on the review panel of Melas and African American Review. Professor Ghosh has had the distinction of interviewing some of the most prominent contemporary African American writers during and after his senior Fulbright Fellowship. These include heavyweight authors like Charles Johnson, National Book Award, August Wilson, who won the 2 times Pulitzer Prize, Octavia Butler, Miller, Stanley Crouch, Joseph Jordan, Harriet Millen, Lama Rangel, Lucinda Roy, among others. He has brought together numerous white and African American authors in the Charles Johnson Embracing the World, which he edited with Miller. His widely acclaimed book, Calculus of Power, Modern American Political Novel, has a complete section devoted to African American issues with a special emphasis on Richard Wright, Ralph Ellison, James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, and Alice Walker. He has recently been interviewed by History News Network USA on his latest book, Mirror from the Indus, Essays, Tributes, and Memoirs. Professor N.K. Ghosh has been a regular visitor to the ASRC, American Studies Research Center. Now he has been renamed as OUCIP as part of Osmania University, Telangana State, India. We are very thankful to you, sir, for supporting us, enlightening us with your valuable thoughts, valuable remarks, and valuable insights. Apart from this, he is the chief editor to the Remarkings, which is one of the prestigious international journals and which has the highest impact factor in the literary journals of the country. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation to chair the session. Now I request Professor N.K. Ghosh will introduce today's keynote speaker, Donna Harper, ma'am, to the online and offline audience. Thank you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Nageshwar Rao, for the nice words you spoke about me. And Dr. Donna Akiba Sullivan Hopper. I cannot tell you how much pleasure I'm deriving by being given the privilege of introducing you to the August participants and OUCIP. The biodata which has been was forwarded to me by OUCIP, I think if I were to focus on that, the entire hour of the keynote would go into it. A very impressive biodata. And let me just begin by saying a few words which probably may escape your notice when you are Googling her biodata on the net. Dr. Donna Akiba Sullivan Harper is Fuller E. Callaway Professor of English, Spelman College, Atlanta, Georgia, United States of America. A PhD in 1988 from Emory University, Atlanta, Georgia. Her greatest asset is when she says, I'm a teacher at heart, focusing on students is what I love. Dr. Harper is among the first 3 African American children to desegregate the public schools in our hometown of Suffolk. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, I think this is a big thing about Dr. Harper. She has been influenced greatly by one of the greatest of African American writers, poets, essayists, and what have you, Langston Hughes. And in the history of Spelman College, she is only the 4th person to be named a Callaway professor. She is the recipient of the Langston Hughes Prize for Excellence in Literature and Vision, and the first to be honored with this award for helping to found the Langston Hughes Society. What is very important is that one of our focus areas of publication is Langston Hughes, different kind of approaches. She is the later simple stories, the early simple stories, Langston Hughes short stories, and for which the introduction has been written by one of the African American giant critics, Arnold Rampersad, whom I had the privilege of interviewing for remarkings in our special number on Langston Hughes in January 2014. What is very important for all those who are participating in this historic conference is that she has not just been a teacher, teaching students the syllabus that has been given to her. I think, without any apology, I can call her a great African American literary activist. And one statement I would like to share with you, which she has uttered about leadership. She says that although leadership makes myriad personal and professional demands, I encourage people to step up and be leaders. Many times I hear people hesitate because they say, I'm too busy, or I have got to do my research, or I have got a family. All of these are real, but I assure you that the things I have done in my life, I've done while caring for elderly parents, taking care of a child, and being a significant other to a partner. People should find a way to juggle a little bit because leadership teaches you lessons you cannot learn any other way. So I think we can easily look forward to a great utterances from Donna Parker. The topic she's going to speak on is empathy, identity, and advocacy. These three terms probably are absolutely seminal to any discourse on African American writings. And the part of her talk is probing conversations, correspondence, and archives to better explicate the novels of selected 20th and 21st century African American novelists. And I think, in the light of the theme of the conference, we could not have had a better topic for the keynote. So, with a statement of Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, "Our lives begin to lose meaning when we stop reacting to things that matter." So I have great privilege in inviting and welcoming, both on behalf of OUCIP and on behalf of Remarkings, a person who, as Langston Hughes had mentioned, has a soul deep like the rivers. So, Dr. Donna Parker, it's over to you now as we sit enthralled to listen to your first-hand experience of being a writer, of being an activist, and of being an instrument of change. Dr. Parker.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghosh, for that kind and generous introduction. I am delighted to speak today. As noted, it's very, very early here in Atlanta, Georgia, but I know it's late in the afternoon for you in India. So I will do my best to keep you enlivened. And I want to especially thank Dr. Shruti Das for reaching out to me and extending this invitation to me. This is my first time speaking in India. And even though the experience is virtual, I assure you that my excitement is genuine. George Houston Bass, secretary and literary assistant to Langston Hughes from June of 1959 to July of 1964, recalled accompanying Langston Hughes on a walk home after dinner. Bass asked Hughes if he had seen one thing and then another, but each time Langston Hughes said no, he had not seen whatever it was Bass was asking him about. Finally, exasperated, George Bass asked his employer, "My God, what were you looking at?" Hughes replied, "What you weren't looking at." Now, who can argue with whatever Langston Hughes was looking at? But as for us as scholars of literature, we need to be more like Langston Hughes. When all scholars focus on the same thing, we are likely to respond the same way. All of us should not be saying the same things. Look-alike responses can be appropriate, as with religious rituals or group dances. However, with literary explication, we must be more like Langston Hughes and look at all the things that other people are not looking at. One must explore the context, examine the history, and possibly consider an author's personal and ancestral relationships to the characters, the setting, and the actions in the novels. If possible, one should discover how and why the author selected those words, the specific language chosen in the work. As scholars, we should find what Robert Frost called The Road Less Traveled. And that, as Robert Frost writes, can make all the difference. Merely reading the works, no matter how many times we read them, we will not always allow to see the deliberate intentions of the author. An example comes from a person who is not a literature performer. She is an actress, Cicely Tyson. In her 2021 memoir, Just As I Am, Cicely Tyson indicated that the roles she agreed to portray, even the roles she turned down, were all part of her intention to be an advocate for African American people. She gladly embraced her roles in Sounder and the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, and even minor roles such as Sipsy in Fried Green Tomatoes, always believing that these roles, the roles she selected, advanced the way African American people, especially women, could be viewed. She deliberately refused roles during the blaxploitation period of film, unwilling to offer further evidence of negative stereotypes. Without her own disclosures, one might watch films that she appears in, and one might not notice her absence in certain other kinds of film or television projects, not realizing how carefully she reviewed those scripts before accepting the roles or declining them. Likewise, with novels, the reader cannot possibly know the specific intentions and the transformations an author may have experienced during the writing and revision of a novel, unless that reader also examines conversations, correspondence, and archival copies of manuscript or typescript drafts of the eventually published works. To avoid saying what everyone else has said, it is helpful to move beyond the literary work itself. Many novelists have written volumes of essays as well. This talk today is not focused on those essays, although they certainly should be consulted and considered. Today, my hope is that each of you will learn about at least one new resource that will help to reveal fresh insights on the literary works you wish to explicate. The focus is on conversations, correspondence, and archives. Conversations with authors can be engaging and bountiful with insights, and Dr. Ghosh clearly has experience in this area and may add things after I complete my speech. But sometimes those conversations with authors are pedestrian, revealing nothing new. The secret ingredient in engaging conversations is the interviewer. Look for interviews conducted by people who truly know the body of work written by that author and who can bring up connections that stimulate the author to elaborate further. In assigning my students to present on individual reports to summarize and highlight critical essays about the works that we are reading in class, I always require the students to investigate the author of the article. What else has that author produced? Is this person considered an expert in the field? And it is interesting to note whether that person is a new assistant professor or perhaps an endowed chair at a college or university. Insightful remarks can come from either. But we do want to note the longevity of the person's engagement with literature. I even encourage my students to locate a photograph of the author if possible. While we may not always conduct such a thorough investigation into the credentials of each person conducting an interview with an author, it is useful to gauge the extent to which this person and the publication in which the interview appears might genuinely know the author being interviewed. The familiarity of the interviewer with that author and that author's body of work, along with the familiarity with the social context, the cultural nuances of the work, these factors will permit the interviewer to ask probing questions that can expand the reader's appreciation for the work and for the author. Perceptive interviewers make the author feel comfortable that the book has really been read and understood, often as the newest book compares to or differs from earlier works. As an example, Michael Silverblatt, the host of a radio broadcast called Bookworm for over 30 years, conducted a lively interview with Toni Morrison about her 8th novel, Love. He launches the interview by listing all of her previous 7 novels, and then he announces how he has embraced or wrestled with love. Silverblatt. This book, Love, seems to me to be about time and place, the way in which, depending on who you are and when you were there, your experience changes who you are, what love is, and what you know. The setting of this place has once been a resort. The people in the resort have moved into a home on Monarch Street. They are in an area that has once been an oceanside, but now there's a place called Oceanside, not by an ocean, with very cheap government housing. Other places that people remember are covered now by water. The place we're hearing about so vibrantly does not exist except in memory. And the book seems to be about the way love is a collection of pieces that people can assemble even when they can't speak to one another. The reader assembles love. Is that correct? Morrison. Very, very close. What came to mind as you were talking was the idea I had of the way crystal forms. You know, you have a small piece, and then it expands to another. And another layer comes on in a different shape, but it's all the same material. And when you get finished, it's different facets, different light, looking at one simple thing. Now, I shared that exchange between Silverblatt and Morrison to show that Silverblatt summarized the angle he wants to take, and Morrison is obviously satisfied that he has just about appreciated what she intended. Yet, she moves immediately to the metaphor of crystal formation. Throughout the remainder of that interview, Silverblatt continues to return to the metaphor of crystal formation. He does not merely ask questions, he poses theories and asks if he has sufficiently touched upon the truths or the intentions Morrison had wanted to convey. With his thoughtful summaries and interesting metaphors, Silverblatt inspires Morrison to proclaim fascinating things about what matters most to her. things that she identifies with, and things she is attempting to advocate in her work. Here's a final passage I will share from Morrison's commentary in that interview with Silverblatt. Morrison: "My feeling is that the plot, the lean plot, is information. This is what happened, but the meaning of a novel is in its structure. I mean, we don't live lives in plots. We sometimes retell ourselves the narrative of our lives in a chronological way, but it doesn't happen that way. We learn something today that clarifies something 10 years ago." Exploring Morrison's assertions about structure can lead to wonderful new ways of discussing not just her eighth novel, Love, but many of her novels. Now, perhaps the most intriguing thing for me about revelations that Morrison conveyed during various interviews was that in the novel Love, Morrison omitted the word love in any of its forms from the mouths of any character except the one named Love. Morrison states many times in interviews and in her own essays how carefully she selects her words. She insists upon finding and using what she calls the language that is particular. Thus, when Morrison decides to give her novel the title Love, she returns to her draft and removes the word love from the mouth of every other character in the manuscript, except as spoken by the woman named Love. Thus, not only the words used, but even the words avoided can be significant for an author. Interviews and manuscript drafts can reveal these subtle or drastic changes and the author's motivations for making such revisions. Now, those are good interviews. Those are the ones to seek. But in contrast to those perceptive and well-prepared conversations that reveal so much, other interviews, often conducted by reporters assigned to interview the authors, may have only a cursory or bare minimally scratching the surface kind of awareness of the author and the work. In those unfortunate cases, the interview includes shallow and possibly insulting physical descriptions of the author and may include uninformed questions that reveal a failure to conduct adequate background research. For example, and I shall not name the interviewer, someone else who was interviewing Toni Morrison discussing Love asked Toni Morrison, "Were there really luxury holiday resorts for Blacks?" Before meeting Toni Morrison, this interviewer should have done some research. As far back as Morrison's third novel, Song of Solomon, Morrison had wealthy characters visiting luxury resorts. Ample evidence exists. This question should not have been asked during that interview. And one can even judge from the brevity and the curtness of Morrison's responses to such questions that she is disdainful of the lack of preparation of that particular interviewer. Sadly, many of the interviews in Conversations with Richard Wright fit into this disappointing category of uninformed questions and completely unnecessary physical descriptions of the author. One interviewer asked Richard Wright if racial discrimination in the northern states of the United States was similar to class snobbery in England? That's a kind of question that reflects a lack of background research. And many of the questions in those interviews were posed by newspaper journalists rather than by scholars. Such questions tended to probe Wright about racial issues, politics, and life in general, rather than asking detailed questions about specific literary works. More valuable kinds of interviews appear in conversations with James Baldwin, and the best ones are rendered by representatives from Black journals and magazines, such as The Black Scholar or Essence magazine. For example, Essence magazine captured a conversation James Baldwin had with incarcerated women in Rikers Island. Although these were not the seasoned literary explorers I had recommended earlier, their questions certainly prompted Baldwin to speak freely and comfortably. He also admitted in that session, as he has done in many other interviews, that music, rather than American literature, really was his language. He spoke many times of the influence of music upon him rather than literature, although we know how extensively and joyfully he read. The African American writer throughout this evaluation tends to find inspiration in music, and very often that music weaves its way into the writings. Another stimulating interview with James Baldwin was conducted by an unnamed representative of The Black Scholar, a journal that was peer-reviewed. While many of the questions focused on assertions James Baldwin had made in his numerous essays, Baldwin's answers are applicable to his novels as well. Baldwin clearly owns his political voice. Baldwin: when I moved out from America, I began to see it from a different perspective. I can see now what had happened to so many people who had perished around me. And I could see that it was a political fact, a political disaster, and that I myself was, in any case, a political target. I also realized that to be a writer, which involves, after all, disturbing the peace, was political, whether one liked it or not, because if one is doing anything at all, one is trying to change the consciousness of other people. You're trying also to change your own consciousness. You have to use your consciousness. You have to trust it to the extent enough to begin to talk. And you talk with the intention of beginning a ferment, beginning a disturbance in someone else's mind so that he sees the situation. That's the intensity of Baldwin's response. And if you have read Baldwin, particularly his essays, intensity is always present. Peer-reviewed interviews such as that one in a journal in the Black Scholar will have undergone thorough fact-checking and scrutiny. Some interviews in popular publications, including some newspapers, might not have been checked so carefully for accuracy. So it is very important to evaluate the source of the interviews you select. The very best interviews are by seasoned scholars who have closely read the works and who have good awareness of the author. Indeed, they may have even developed close connections with the works, such that they can bring insights the author did not even realize could be present. An example of this finest sort of interview is entitled Blacks, Modernism, and the American South, an interview with Toni Morrison by Carolyn C. Dinard. This interview was first published in 1998. Carolyn Dinard is the founder of the Toni Morrison Society, which began in 1993. So again, this interview was conducted in 1998. In those 5 years since the founding of the Toni Morrison Society, which Toni Morrison gave her approval to, Dr. Dinard had met with Toni Morrison on numerous occasions. They had developed a rather friendly association. And that interview in 1998 has the feel of a deep conversation between friends. Dinard, who grew up in Mississippi, brought her own understanding of the United States' southern states to her reading of Morrison's work. And she knew that Morrison had grown up in Lorain, Ohio, not in the U.S. South. This interview by Dinard has been reprinted and cited by many other Morrison scholars. And that kind of bibliographic legacy, the reprinting, the reusing, the quoting, points also to significant interviews. Those are markers for us to use as we decide how we will interrogate conversations. There is an entire series, Literary Conversations, published by the University Press of Mississippi. It includes at least 191 titles. So there is a wealth of information involving conversations with authors. As noted, these interviews range in depth. They nevertheless can all be helpful in gaining a more candid response from the authors to ascertain what elements they have empathy with, what causes they plan to advocate, and how exactly they might identify with various groups, whether these are people in their works or people in the reading audience. Now, again, Professor Ghosh, I hope that you might share some insights at the end about your style and technique and experience as an interviewer. But I'd like now to move on to correspondence, which is another conduit to fresh insights. Certainly, there are published and edited compilations of letters. And as you already have heard, Langston Hughes is the area of my greatest expertise. And with Langston Hughes, there is a bounty of such collected and published volumes of letters. The earliest of these was edited by Charles H. Nichols of Brown University. It appeared in 1980, and it included letters exchanged between Langston Hughes and his dear friend and frequent collaborator, Arna Bontemps. This volume is rich. It is chronologically ordered, and it is indexed, so it provides a convenient place to begin an exploration of almost anything, and those two men talked about everything. Emily Bernard edited a slim volume of letters between Langston Hughes and Carl Van Vechten. And Van Vechten, in fact, is the one who launched an extensive archival collection at Yale University. Then Arnold Rampersad and David Roselle edited a huge collection of letters between various people and Langston Hughes. And finally, a volume called Letters to Langston traced the exchange between publicly declared communists, Louise Thompson Patterson and William L. Patterson, along with Evelyn Graves Crawford and Matt N. Crawford. They were corresponding with their good friend, Langston Hughes, who never called himself a communist. It's an interesting volume. It is one of the more recent ones and has not been examined as much as I'm sure it will be in the future. Now, given the political affiliation of William Patterson, his frank critiques of some of Hughes's works are quite informative. For example, he challenged the play Simply Heavenly as being populated by characters who did not show a desire for change. Pat, as William Patterson was called, found the simple character too childish, and Hughes responds very graciously to this critique. He is thoughtful in his response. He acknowledges all of the negative commentary that his friend supplies, but Hughes also notes the challenges of writing for various genres. He says, in books, one has 300 pages to work with a play, only 80. In publishing, only one editor to contend with, and mine almost never suggests changes. But in theater, everybody pulls up and hauls at a script. So all I can say is, I did the best I could under the circumstances. Hughes clearly heard his friend, but he also wanted the process of his craft to be understood and acknowledged. This kind of critique and response is completely missing from a mere reading of the play. And that is one example of how correspondence can truly add to our insight. We can return to the book volumes of simple stories, contrast those to the play, the text of the play, and notice what has been skimmed away, and think about what was added or changed because of the many voices and influences that operate when an author produces a play. Now, despite all of the information and insight available in these several books of letters about Langston Hughes, there is so much more that has not. Someone needs to mute. Thank you. There is so much more that remains undiscussed. The James Weldon Johnson collection at the Beinecke Library in Yale University has the bulk of Langston Hughes's correspondence, and much of that collection has now been digitized. Thus, even though the COVID pandemic has complicated our physical access to archival materials, technology has provided access to items that once required a physical visit and copious note-taking or copy-making. When I was peeking at the Langston Hughes collection at the Beinecke recently, I saw a folder marked Indian Letters. That is the James Weldon Johnson collection, manuscript number 26, which contains 74 images. The letters come from several different people, including R. Lal Singh, who was the editor of India News and was a member of the Indian National Congress. Although Hughes did not travel to India, he did write poems and columns that addressed the need for freedom in India. Surely, more can be written about Hughes's works and his comments related to the successful quest for independence in India, so perhaps these materials will be useful for future scrutiny and discussion. Now, archives, which include these kinds of uncollected letters, archives are treasure chests, especially when the author has donated drafts of published works and correspondence about those works. My own first experience with archival treasures occurred when I was in graduate school at Emory University, when I casually remarked in a paper for my professor that Langston Hughes's short story about Simple, called Ways and Means, discussed the Harlem riots of 1943, but it clearly was written later, since it mentioned Hiroshima, and that atomic bomb was not detonated until 1945. I thought I was being astute. My professor wrote in the margin, "When did he write it?" I didn't know, but I was determined to find out. Now, most people in 1980 referenced the Simple Stories by Langston Hughes in terms of his 1960 compilation, The Best of Simple. As noted earlier, we want to take the road less often traveled. So I had already departed from The Best of Simple. I selected the Ways and Means from a 1957 collection of Simple Stories, Simple Stakes a Claim, which was the most political of those Simple collections. However, simply using that volume did not answer the question, when did Hughes write Ways and Means? Well, in the 1980s, the common wisdom in critical summaries of the Simple Stories was that Hughes had first published those stories in the Chicago Defender, a widely distributed Black newspaper, and he then collected them and published them as books. Clearly, I needed to see those original columns in the Chicago Defender so that I could determine when Hughes wrote Ways and Means. Securing the Chicago Defender required me to take advantage of interlibrary loan because Emory University did not own the microfilm containing the 1940s editions of that newspaper. As each batch of film arrived, I would be notified, and I had to view the microfilm on large reels using big, clunky microfilm readers in the dimly lit basement of the Emory University Library. Today, those same archival materials are available through ProQuest historic newspapers, and I can view those 1940s newspapers from the comfort of my own home. Well, I got those newspaper columns and I discovered that the columns Hughes wrote were almost never merely collected and then published into book-length anthologies. I found bits and pieces that Hughes would gather from different columns. He would revise them and combine them to create episodes such as Ways and Means. But I also found many columns that were not written in the fictional voice of Just Be Simple. They were editorial comments in Langston Hughes's own voice. I found some written immediately after the Harlem riots of August 1943. And indeed, a majority of the columns throughout Hughes's period as a writer for the Chicago Defender were not written in the simple fictional technique at all. No one had described the full context of Hughes's columns in the Chicago Defender. I was fascinated. I wanted to see the manuscripts so I could maybe gather how he put those things together. I also wanted to see correspondence to see how he talked about this with his friends or with his literary agent or with publishers. And in order to view those things, I had to travel to Yale University to use that Beinecke collection, the James Weldon Johnson collection established by Carl Van Vechten. There I found the exchanges between Hughes and his friends, those who told him to publish the stories. I also saw the exchanges between Hughes and his literary agents and the publishers. This material that I found led not only to my doctoral dissertation, but to my monograph, Not So Simple, the title of which aptly contradicts the common wisdom about how easily Hughes had collected and published the simple stories. It clearly was not so simple. As noted earlier in the discussion of correspondence, the Beinecke Library has now digitized many of its holdings, including huge amounts of material by and about Langston Hughes. Once again, instead of having to travel to New Haven, Connecticut, having to spend time in a specific room for scholars, I can now read many of these materials from the comfort of my own home. Alice Walker mentions in a 1973 interview with John O'Brien that the first draft of her first novel, The Third Life of Grange Copeland, that first draft was not used at all in the published novel. Not even one line, she says. To date, I have not seen anybody write about the drafts of the novel. The Alice Walker papers can be examined at the Stuart A. Rose Manuscript, Archives, and Rare Book Library at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, in the U.S. This collection includes 253 boxes and many other items. At present, most of this material must be used in the library. However, the finding aid online offers an impressive overview of what is available. Toni Morrison's papers are in the Harvey S. Firestone Memorial Library at Princeton University in Princeton, New Jersey. Within this massive collection of 337 boxes, 68 boxes of materials are devoted to her novels, and all of the novels except Song of Solomon are represented. Materials related to Morrison's third novel, Song of Solomon, were probably destroyed in the fire that ravaged her home in New York in 1993. These boxes contain drafts of the novels and outlines and notes. 3 boxes are devoted to The Bluest Eye, which has been the subject and will be the subject of several papers during this conference. Many of these materials are available electronically, but they are restricted to Princeton-affiliated users. And Gloria Naylor is another author who is examined in several papers for this conference. Naylor's papers are housed at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. A symposium with virtual options will be held November 5th and 6th of this year to highlight some of the ways that the archival collection for Gloria Naylor will open for scholars. That a symposium focuses on the insights to be gained from Gloria Naylor's archives is but one signal of the value of pursuing these materials. Well, this talk has not focused on theories. My intention was to lead more of you to the archival, conversational, and beautifully collected materials that we can find in the records, particularly those held in the libraries named. I hope these materials will afford you a chance to travel the road less traveled, to see what everyone else is not seeing, and to gain more proximity to these authors. Thank you for the privilege of allowing me to share these remarks with you, and I wish you a continued successful conference.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Donna Harper, for your brilliant focus on the 3 aspects of empathy, identity, and advocacy. I think what real value I attribute to your talk this evening and morning at your place is the fact that in this age of digitalization, where you have oceans and oceans of material, it is absolutely necessary to stop and ask yourself why I wish to study this author, what works of this author should I be interested in, because these questions have to be answered by the seeker. And what if you are just trying to scale the entire oceans and oceans of information? It would be like those political leaders who venture out in an aeroplane to assess the flood situation. And I feel what is absolutely necessary is, how do you look for the pearls that are there in that ocean? And to cite an instance, it was, if you take the case of Langston Hughes himself, it is said that he threw all his books into the Mississippi. And when he was asked why he did a thing like that, he had answered that what you write from your gut feeling, that will never come from merely reading books. And like Dr. Donna Harper said, like I could throw some light on how I interview people. Since I'm talking to this audience tomorrow in the morning, I will not go deep into the issue of African-American relationships. But I feel that when I am interviewing someone, if he is an author of works, then I first make it a point that I don't even talk to him or her about the interview before I have done my basic research on what I wish to convey and what I wish him or her to convey. Now, what happens if you're asking general questions like Dr. Dana highlighted? It is like look-alike references. So when you're looking at the same thing, you're making it as absolutely a boring experience. What I feel is, if I'm interviewing somebody for remarkings, I would ask myself that what would a reader of remarkings, what would be his expectations? What kind of approach does the writer have to a particular work of art? And if the work is connected to some activism of some sort, then you will have to see, is there any kind of a dichotomy between what you have written and what you are saying and what you are doing, which often happens. And that is why there is so much of conflict. So what I personally feel is that Dr. Donna has given all the participants in this conference three distinct terms: empathy, identity, and advocacy. And empathy is something which surfing on the Google will not give you. It is inside you. Similarly, when you talk of identity, whose identity? From which perspective? If it is an African American, what is the perspective from which he looks at identity? If I'm interviewing an African American, obviously one of my questions, if it is evident from the works of that particular author or the person I'm interviewing, would be, did you face this kind of a thing yourself? Can you share that experience? And what you say in your novel or poem or whatever it is, does it justify the approach you have towards the whole point? Because you see, when we talk about race, one term we use is racial mountain. Now what happens? What do you do with the racial mountain? You take a selfie, you take a photograph, and you put it on your DP and say, this is the mountain and all that. No. if you're talking about a racial mountain, what lies at the bottom of that mountain? If this doesn't interest you, who are the people who have been affected? If this doesn't interest you, then obviously empathy, identity would be missing. And if you don't have empathy and identity, a sense of empathy and identity, which can come from very deep-rooted kind of curiosity, which will make you go from one work to another, to one archive to another, and explore, as she said, the various kind of available texts that you have. Only then you can talk of advocacy. And advocacy means, what do you think is going to change if somebody reads work like this? And to be very frank, this is what I feel is, once you sort of get into all these, you have to probe really, whether it is conversations, correspondence, and archives. Why? To better explicate the novels of selected authors. And when you are selecting authors, you have to, especially those who are into research, those who are doing their PhD. If you're working on Toni Morrison, the first question which I feel before you start reading a word about Toni Morrison is, why am I choosing Toni Morrison? And while you are making this choice, you will have to go to the ocean, but have to dive deep into it and see where you can find those pearls of wisdom. Because just gathering information, just wading through information will not lead you anywhere. So I feel that this keynote, which our friend Donna from Georgia addressed, will probably tell all the participants here, tell everyone who's involved with this conference, that when we are doing our work, let us apply these attributes and see what comes out of it. And I'm sure this is going to be, if you think this way, it is going to be a turning point, not only in your thought process, and like she quoted Frost a number of times, and that will make all the difference. Because if you are not involved in what you are looking for, who would be interested in it? I cannot sort of go just superficially and expect somebody to read a few catchy sentences and just get into it. Because if you are not yourself a part of the reading experience, if you don't take that as something very personal, I don't think this research, apart from getting you promotions and getting you honorariums and your hike in salary, these would lead you nowhere. And if that is the thing, then literature's purpose comes to an end. Thank you very much, Dr. Donna. But before that, I would like to ask Dr. Nageshwar, would you like to, though it is customary that a keynote is not followed by question answer session, but if there are anyone among the participants who would like to
Yes, sir. There are no questions from.
Okay.
Yeah, only.
Well, if there are no questions,
thank you very much.
and Dr. Donna, can I ask you to comment on
and
one
writing lecture. And
element of curiosity.
thankful to you for your wonderful lecture and first-hand experiences of African American writings, and also your personal observations on various writings. Thank you, ma'am.
Dr. Nageshwar Rao,
Wants to add something.
can you just give me a minute or two? Dr. Donna, one of the curiosities that come into mind is a result of the endless controversy. And the controversy is about that when we talk about a Dalit writer, when we talk about an African American writer, when we talk about the Native American writer, do you believe that only those who have lived that experience can write about them? For reference, you can take Harry Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin and Not to Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. What is your take on this?
In general, I would argue that any person can write about anything that the person has researched and has attempted to engage. But if you look at Stockett's novel, The Help, which came out about 5 years ago, I was very clear that her perspective as a person who grew up having Black maids did not afford her that inner perception to really convey the experience of those Black maids. So even the language that was used, the dialect that she attempted to represent was inauthentic. So just because you have been around a certain person doesn't mean that you understand, back to those terms I used earlier, that does not mean you have full empathy and that you really understand the identity of the person. However, when we flip that over, we can see someone like Robert Hemingway, who is deceased now, but he was once the chancellor at the University of Kansas. His biography of Zora Neale Hurston was marvelous. So he was a white male writing about a Black woman, and he did a beautiful job. Therefore, I don't see a blanket answer to that. It is possible, but it is also possible to miss the mark. And as with the example I gave when Langston Hughes got criticism from his friend, it is important for us to be able to receive valid criticism and be prepared to understand where our weaknesses might be. That allows us to improve the next time that we make our effort.
Thank you very much, Donna. And on my personal behalf, I thank you from the core of my heart for being so involved, getting up so early and being with us. And about Dr. Donna, I might share with the participants that when I just looked at her name yesterday, I said, let me just sort of Google her, and then I got her email. So I sent her an email, and I thought, she would not be able to see this before she speaks to us tomorrow. But in the morning when I woke up, there was her response. And she said that she would certainly look forward to this new relationship and new association. And, that confirmed that what we had been talking about, that empathy across the more than half the world, that was there. Thank you very much, Dr. Donna. Thank you very much, Dr. Nageshwar Rao. Dr. Karunakar, I would like to mention, because he told me about this, and Dr. Others who I can figure out from the screen, Dr. Shruti, Dr. Smita Jha, and it was wonderful to be with all of you, and the ones, and Sadaf, Malik Hassan, and others that I can see on the screen their emblems, I must say. I thank you one and all. And Dr. Donna will be in touch. Have a great time. Remain safe from the COVID around and keep on doing the grand work that you have been doing so far. Thank you, one and all.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Donna. I call you Akiva, actually. So, thank you very much for keeping my request and being here with us. Your talk has been very, very insightful. It's something very new. These research scholars who are the participants here and the major beneficiaries, we will take away a lot from today's talk because they generally read the text. And then one of my scholars asked me, there was a debate, someone had come from abroad and there was a debate that they asked that you are working on African American literature. What is your currency? What do you know about African Americans? You stay in India, you stay in one little part of India, you read in an Indian university, you have studied in your own vernacular language, and you're doing your PhD in African American literature. What is your currency? Does someone really have to know the African Americans, really have to go there, live there, get an experience, and do research? Or can one read the material available from available in libraries, and as you said, these days from the digital space, available from the comfort of our homes, and still do research? I personally think that it's empathy that makes you feel for them, and when you read, you interpret in your own ways. So how would you respond to this, Akiva?
Well, this is related to what Dr. Ghosh had asked in a sense, but as a researcher, especially a student researcher, there is so much that the student can investigate. And many of these authors, I can go to Zora Neale Hurston in Mules and Men, talked about how she did not even appreciate her own background until she had distance from it, until she was at Barnard College in New York City. Only then did she really gain that insight. Toni Morrison has spoken of it many times, the need to have perspective and gaining that perspective through distance. So having some difference, having some distance gives a perspective that is unique. The important thing is not to miss the mark. Just as a brief example, I heard a presentation in China about Langston Hughes's poetry book, Ask Your Mama. And the scholar presenting had interpreted that title to mean a child asking his or her mother a question. That's almost the exact opposite of what that title meant. The title was almost an insult, that when someone is imposing on you and you don't want to respond, instead of giving a valid answer, you say, ask your mama. It's off cuff, it is insulting. And I was able to have lunch with the scholar who had made that mistake to help that person understand. So I think it is important. It can be done. In other words, a person can interpret from a distance, and often distance and difference gives a wonderful perspective. But you need other eyes to be sure that you have the nuances, the cultural background of whatever it is you're discussing. So yes, it can be done. Make sure you've got a verifiable source to assure you you're on target, but then use the difference, use the distance to give the unique perspective.
Thank you, Akiva. Thank you so much. I just want to tell you on behalf of my dear friend, Professor Karunakar, and my senior colleague, Professor Ghosh, Pandana Rao, Osmania University, and me as a delegate here, how much we appreciate your time, your talk, and all that went into making this talk. Thank you very much, Akiva. Hope to see you and to continue this beautiful relationship.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Donna Harper, for giving a wonderful lecture on the African American writers. Most of our students who are into the African American works, definitely your lecture will be great useful to them. And hope so the OUCIP will continue the relationship with you in future. And if the pandemic goes away, you may be invited to Hyderabad. So hope you will definitely come to Hyderabad and meet us, and also our teachers at Agra University and also in Osmania University. If fortunately, if I am there in US, one of my brother-in-law stays in Atlanta. Oh yeah, my brother-in-law stays in Atlanta. So if I am there, I definitely come and see you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I think you can leave the site and everyone, yeah, thank you. Thank you once again to all of you. Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Shruti, and thank you, Nageshwar.
Okay, I don't know. Not beyond this.
Oh, 1 second. Likita, you have access to admit me in, right? Yeah. Yeah. 1 second. I'm just going back and I'll come back. Vijaya ma'am was here, right? Yes. Ma'am.
Good evening, dear participants. I'm here once again. I think I interrupted Ms. Rajita in her paper presentation session, which was to be between 3:15 to 4:15, and because of the delay of the schedule and the keynote speaker was waiting for us, we requested Ms. Rajita to wait for a while, and thank you very much, Rajita, for that. I now invite you to present your paper on slavery and Site in Beloved. Toni Morrison's attack on slavery by knitting the story of Site. Site or Site? Sate. 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 Thank you. I'm glad to be to the delegates over here, Chair and the delegates over here. I would like to admit that I'm a prenatal
or I can say I'm a newborn in front of my teachers. It's a great opportunity to present myself now. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to relate it to the poem that I have written. Naked are my teardrops that carry my raw memories. Down the cheeks to expose my experiences, I hide my shameless tears from the gossip world and ugly lips of judgment. But the judgment poisons spikes and arrows from the society, and my master's arrogance never cared for me and ruled my beauty down. Piercing my identity, they ripped me with their dominant stereotypes. My melanin puffed chicks got raped by the cruel looks of the world. Such innocent are my tears. On them I play the blame game now. But I didn't realize the distorted damage that the dominant world would gift me in the name until it dropped on the floor and God smashed ruthlessly under the cruel boots of slavery by my civilized master. Dedicated to all the women who have suffered the slavery, written by me. Now, in this connection, I would like to add my reflections, sir and ma'am, about how Site, the character who had been molded in the hands of Toni Morrison through her most celebrated novel, Beloved, which is actually put at a corner as a picturized from an angle of a victim who had suffered a lot, especially slavery, and also what a woman should not have experienced overall. So here, the dramatic personality of Sate in Beloved has many inferences to be identified and empathized with. I feel that Toni Morrison had created this so-called character, of course, from a real-life event of Ghana, Madrid, Ghana. But what I would like to tell you is that the suffering that Sate has underwent in her entire picturization of the novel is talking about the victimized state of Sate, or is it backlashing the consciousness, colonial consciousness overall after 100 generations to come? I would like to connect to the class, which I remember from Dr. Parmala Kulkarni, that says, as a mother, you need not be a perfect woman or a perfect mother, which actually was a question from Beloved, her daughter, to so-called or to be called as a daughter, or to be imagined as a daughter, who comes as a surprise after a visit from Carnival return. And that particular character has a subtle question to her mother whether Sate is playing the role of a mother on the whole. And entangled by so many complexities by judgmental societies, Sati, I think that what Toni Morrison tried to connect in designing this character is that is she trying to quieten the world? Is she trying to question the world, especially the dominant stereotype that is about to come after 100 years, the maturity that is about to come after 100 years or so forth, that let that consciousness of dominant stereotype feel ashamed of what they have done. The damage that they have created to this kind of characters that are real life characters which have been dramatized through the pen of Toni Morrison. And now I would like to also tell another example which my friend has criticized, I can say, or commented. When I met Professor Christopher Sir in one meeting, he said that he worked in Libya for a while. And I had got a thought and I just questioned my best friend saying that is Libya a good country to work for? Then the answer that my friend gave is that it is not so good because it's not safe, is what I thought. But one question to you is like, why is the white people or so-called colonized people have to give you slavery in order to make you civilized, in order to bring education to your doorstep? Why did they choose slavery as a tool or an instrument? Is the question. And now by picturizing Sati's damage to the character overall, her suffering, her inexpressible thoughts that she wanted to express, her search for love and the partner which Halle had to just die out of madness, I can say. And everything is like, there is nothing for Sati to remember. There is nothing for Sati to say that she is a wholesome women character that is to be represented to others or to be appreciated by others in the society. It is absolutely ripped by the stereotypic cultures. And now my question to the so-called colonial stereotypes is, instead of choosing this method to bring civilization, instead of choosing this method to make people educated or bring what kind of scientific knowledge that you want to give to these people, can't we choose education? Can't we choose professors like them to travel abroad and teach them cultures? And with this thought, I thought, why did Toni Morrison take Sete as a victim character instead of making it as a powerful character? Is there anything that she wants to tell? Yes. In my observation, in my reflections, I found that instead, I think for Toni Morrison, when she published the novel, it might be a thing of picturizing the victim side of the things that happened in the history, in the black history, especially black slavery. But when it comes to generations after, when we think of a collective consciousness of this world, maybe these kind of evidences, manuscripts or evidences will speak out, backlashing the white community for whatever degradation they have done to the civilization of black community. So in this connection, the exploitation of resources and women by so-called masters is evident in the carvings of Morrison. The story of Sete is inadvertently distorted and torn by her masters, and her inability of her husband turns to be an insane bundle of thoughts, and as a consequence, she becomes a subtle, observer of just taking the sorrow as it comes to her. There is no choice. People say that it's everything in your mind and taking the sorrow, suffering or not suffering is your choice. But my question to you is that when you come to a slave like Sete, did you give a choice to her in the first place? There was no choice for thousands and millions of people in the history when we read. And I don't think so that this choiceless slavery that people have forced upon is now to be a question of debate that we have to understand when you didn't give any choice for them, and how can you say that you have civilized them? In which way you can say that you have civilized them or educated them? Now, my next point of observation is that the role of women in Beloved has many things to be identified. Maybe the frequent scars that she had got tattooed upon, the torturing tree that we generally see because of the lashes that she received from her master, that when she was pregnant and her breast milk was stolen. This is the ugliest truth that I just don't want to talk about, but such a horrible event. When I read the novel, it gave a kind of different experience to me. Okay, and when we see this, that escape and her escape, even though she was tortured so badly, her commitment to escape from the plantation, so-called the irony is the name, the title of the plantation, that it is sweet home. In which way is it a sweet home to her and her home slaves? In which way is that the plantation, which is titled as sweet home to her? And here, I think this particular title of the plantation itself is a question to the consciousness of dominant stereotype that people have built, like whether it is a sweet home or hell to these people. And now, my next observation that I want to add here is that people have thought that about the theme of slavery and fabrication of black women as a victim to the apparent acts of her white masters on her personality, both mentally and physically. Sete, as a black slave, was used as a voice for millions of black women by Toni Morrison in her masterpiece. But beloved to why is that unless a character like Beloved is being degraded, is being suffered so much, the suffering is dramatized and colored so much and the spices added so much, unless and until the character is picturized in such a dimension, such an angle, why not our eyes are open? Why not our eyes are open to understand that the melanin is something that is naturally there, and it is nowhere in connection to make a person slave because she has or he has more melanin than yours. To understand this scientific fact, I think the scientifically highly evolved communities have forgotten this kind of research, which actually they have said. So here, the deep-rooted ignorance, I can say that though maybe because they are blinded by power or blinded by, I don't want to comment on this, but maybe because they have that kind of power, I think they might have used a different tool or methodology in order to approach the civilizations which are still born, or maybe they want to be natural. The Africans want, or the black community want to be naturally, in their own world. But maybe bringing civilization to them is well and good. It's appreciable, but unless you want to try, unless you want to try upon a woman's identity, unless you want to create a scar on her identity, you don't want to advertise your power. You are using her as a tool to advertise your power, which is actually a questionable task. And here, this advertisement has gone to such a task where, in advanced chapters, we understand that in order to escape her masters to take away the child from slavery, she has to kill her own child. This is the highest thing that we have to really question for. Are you? And now the judgment comes and it says that she has to put in jail, whatever it is. But who made that? Who made her to do that? Who made her to lose the identity or to blot her identity of as a mother into a murderer? And she says that the death of her child will keep her much safer than in front of her, than in hands of her master, and that is a question. I can say that really, as people, we have to, as humans, we have to understand that is that Morrison trying to depict this kind of brutal act by a woman who loves her children the most, and trying to lash the consciousness or lash those people who have tried to colonize or create slavery? Is that an attack by Toni Morrison? That by creating setting in such a power in such a suffering, trying to show that kind of a suffering character is actually a powerful character to question the upcoming generations and what kind of attitudes they have been going through. Is that kind of thing that she's trying to interpret as what my point is? And when you come to the gruesome response of sensitivity of a woman, lashed by memories of demonic slavery, followed by supernatural episodes. See, the suffering of Sete is not been ended just by the kind of murder, and then later baby sucks, and then her children escaping from their house, and then only Denver and she trying to cope up in that house where it has been haunted by supernatural powers, what people say. But why is she supposed to go into that episode of supernatural events which has been haunted by a house and a woman, a single mother and a single woman with a young girl, Denver, trying to protect her identity, trying to protect her daughter and survive in a banned community, in a community which has banned them. Okay, and here I believe that this kind of shattered events, that disturbing events, I can say, shattered disturbing events, are really reflecting what kind of subconscious thoughts that we are trying to put on, and is it a checkmate game that she has tried to. But by using Bella, did she use Queen Kong in order to give a checkmate to the consciousness? Is what consciousness of dominance is what my point was. And overall, before I conclude, I would like to just add one more line, saying that the final touch of Sete is finding her best quoted quote in the novel is that you are your best thing. That concludes that the universal touch of feminine identity that Toni Morrison tried to conclude in a nicer way, in a cooler way, that she says that Sete is her best thing. She has to end her search and she has to just accept herself as she is, and then she has to start a new life, a bright life. And that is how a feminine identity of love and complete composition as a human being is concluded by Toni Morrison. But I believe that her character sketch is actually a weapon that she has used by dipping her into the suffering characteristic dramatic episodes. She wants to show the world what kind of damage the dominant world has done on these slaves. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellison, for that very passionate paper. May I know the references for which you have, or are there your own statements?
Most of them are my own statements now, including the whole. And I have also some references I read and I listened to BBC radio, the drama and that stuff for 15 minutes, and I also read the novel. Other than that, I also want to introduce a Toni Morrison.
Thank you very much. Research and passion should go together with authentic resources. Thank you.
Any questions here? I'm just afraid, sir.
I think
I'm going to take questions from you.
Is for the wait for 45 minutes.
Any questions? I'm so sorry if I have not put up your expectations.
It was very interesting. The way you presented is very passionate.
I need to thank you both actually. Fortunately, you are here. Professor Kalpana, Professor Parimala ma'am has introduced you to me for the first time, and I was searching for a job in Libya, so she introduced you to me, sir. And then I got into research of what kind of schools are there in Libya. I spoke to my friend, okay, and what he said was he gave a negative